Okay, my name is Rahila Gupta and I'm a writer, journalist, political activist.
And where were you born?
Well, strangely, I was born in London, but I lived in India for the first 19 years of my life. So I kind of identify as Indian in that sense. Then I came back to England for 2 years when I was 11 because my father thought I ought to experience the educational system here. So I was here in a comprehensive school from 11 to 13, then came back at 19 and did an MPhil in drama here.
And which part of India were you in?
I lived mostly in Bombay, Mumbai.
And so you started to do drama when you came for?
Well, in terms of as an extension of literature rather than in terms of theatre, so it was dramatic theory. And I'd done my first degree in India and I was looking for some sort of subject matter. I can't even remember how I came to do this particular thesis, but I wanted to do an MA in contemporary English literature, and there were only 2 places that were offering it, and I didn't get into Leeds, and there was some problem with Queen Mary, so then I went to Polytechnic of Central London, which is now the University of Westminster, and perhaps they suggested the topic. I don't know how I came across the topic, so I did elements of farce in the plays of Tom Stoppard, Edward Bond and Joe Orton, so it was a very strange thesis, but anyway.
So do you find any correlation between their kind of farce and sort of Indian theatre or drama?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the thing is, if India, because it's been an ex-colony, a lot of the education is very much styled on, probably a Victorian British curriculum. So it was only because at university we had a couple of radical teachers who were keen that we should discover something of Indian literature, taught us, a little bit about contemporary Indian poets and so on, but it wasn't really part of the curriculum. So in fact, I was completely facing Britain in cultural terms. It was, my whole heritage in India, in terms of my education, was very British. Of course, we went to the theatre as a family, and Mumbai has a lot of regional, quite lively theatre traditions, in Marathi and Gujarati and Hindi. But some of the best, I wouldn't say some. I mean, in the Gujarati theatre, a lot of it is sort of popular farce and comedy. But I remember there was quite a lot of Ibsen and Shaw that was translated into one of the languages, So even in the regional language theatres, there was quite a lot of influence of the West. I'm not saying that was the only thing, but I remember that quite sort of vividly. So coming to England, of course I had an Indian heritage, but part of my Indian heritage was actually British culture, if you see what I mean, mediated probably through an Indian lens to some extent.
And so how did you actually get involved in writing drama then?
Well, I have been interested in writing, poetry, creative writing, journalism for a very long time, almost since I was a teenager. And I came late to writing drama full stop. And it really happened because I co-wrote the story of an Asian woman in Britain who had killed her husband after facing years of violence. And they were interested in, there was a director who was interested in filming it. So he contacted me and said, would I like to write the screenplay? And I got a tranche of money for writing the screenplay from the British Film Institute in those days, before it went to the Film Council and back again. And I thought to myself, writing for film is it's a craft. I can't just embark on it in a way that you can if you can write novels, I think, without understanding the craft. But so I embarked on an MA in '97 in screenwriting, and whether you're writing for screen or not, I mean, drama is drama. Of course, it is affected by the medium in which you're working. But I suppose that was my first experience, really. Well, I'd written a short film. Actually, yeah, I had sort of dabbled in it, but probably that was my first serious attempt at writing drama. So then I wrote the screenplay for based on my book, on this woman's life story, and it was released in 2007. And then that gave me confidence. I felt like I understood, you know, how you shape drama, what are the concerns, you know, how do you understand conflict, and so on and so forth. So that was my first involvement in writing drama.
And so the themes that you tackled, were they? I mean, it's interesting because you said that in India, your training or your education is based in England, but it's mediated obviously by your Indianness. So, in terms of your themes that you chose to write on, or you have been chosen by people to write, did you find that they were specifically very Indian?
Well, see, I think, I suppose what I need to say is that I'm quite active politically, and I'm active around issues of race and gender and religion and so on. And for me, writing at one level is a form of politics. It's about, the whole point about writing is about bringing about change. Whether it's a change in awareness, I suppose that is probably the only change that one can hope for through one's work. So in a sense, my issues were not necessarily about being Indian, because that was too specific in terms of a national identity. I had been active, I identified as black, you know, so there's that whole kind of political movement around the word black and so on. And maybe Asian in some circumstances, but I was involved with Southhold Black Sisters. So for me, the issues that I picked on, that drove me, ended up being issues that were specific to my experience and to my political activity.
So your experience actually is quite transnational, because you've lived in 2 countries.
Yeah.
How does that impact on your work now?
Well, you know, I mean, the thing is, I suppose I feel quite distant from my Indian past in a way, and yet I feel very Indian. It's a very contradictory relationship with my Indianness. I mean, I don't feel confused, I think, like a lot of people who were born in this country and who are from a different, you know, originally from a different country or different ethnic origin. I don't have any confusion about my sense of identity. I feel very rooted in my Indianness at one level. But what that means, what does that Indianness mean anymore? I'm not sure, because it's kind of mixed in with, you know, being British South Asian, British Black, and so on. So there are sort of multiple strands, and how much I feel connected to the India of my youth, I'm not sure.
It's interesting you referred to the confusion of identity. How do you see that has been played out and developed in the whole South Asian theatre drama experience in this country?
I think you can often tell, you know, writing that belongs to a second generation person as opposed to a first generation person. I mean, I certainly felt that when we were writing originally, when I was part of the Asian Women Writers Collective, which along with Ruxana and Ravi and all of these people, the generation of writers that had come from the subcontinent as adults, often, not necessarily, but often reflected on their stories. The content of their stories might sometimes be based in the subcontinent. And a lot of the younger Asian women, or those who had been brought up here, the issue of identity was very much central to their story writing, because they were still trying to work out who they were, where they belonged, what was being imposed upon them. Because this whole thing about identity is, one is an imposition, and as part of that is a negotiation between yourself and the imposition. And then and then there's that confusion: am I what people think I should be? Am I something else? How rational is that process? Often that process is something that is not, you don't really think it through. But I felt, as I say, I felt very rooted. To this day, although the majority of my life has now been spent in Britain, I would say that I feel like I'm an Indian in that, don't feel any sense of confusion or belonging.
So how would you say your artistic journey has developed then, with this rootedness?
Okay, I'll give you an example, which I think is, which sort of, I think reflects this thing of having a British education in ex-colony and then coming here and being expected to be ethnically, in your choice of artistic forms, Indian. This year I wrote a play called Don't Wake Me, the Ballad of Nihal Armstrong. It's written in verse. And an Asian friend of mine, when she came to see it, she said, it's the rubaiyat of Nihal Armstrong. Why the ballad? And I thought to myself, gosh, yes, why didn't I think of calling it the rubaiyat? Why didn't I think of exploring the verse structure of the rubaiyat instead of exploring the verse structure of the ballad and using that to write this? And it's that sort of sitting on the cusp, of feeling I should be more Indian than I am, because that's an expectation. And I think that's part of the problem, I think, of working in this country as a writer, is that there is an expectation or an interest in your work only if it reflects the experience of the other. If it's, and this might sound like I'm being, slightly cynical about it, but in some ways there is a sense in which you need to be exoticized in order to be assimilated, if you see what I mean.
So with this kind of idea in mind, with these kind of pressures, do you have any particular audiences that you wish to target or change perceptions of, with your work?
Well, as a writer, you want to reach out to the broadest possible audiences. You don't want to be restricted to any specific audience. But having said that, then there's the reality. Is the population at large interested in your work or not? First of all, if you're writing for the theatre, the figures that I know are that only 2% of the British population go to the theatre. So in a sense, you're already restricting it in terms of numbers. It's an elite. Within that elite, then, if you're writing specifically for a black audience, you're limiting yourself even more. I mean, obviously, I think many of the mainstream theatres have been trying very hard to attract a black audience to their theatres, and I think that there's a job of work to be done over there. But you do. I mean, when you have a black writer like Roy Williams, for example, you have the experience of going to some of his plays is just completely different, because I remember seeing Fallout at the Royal Court, of all places, and it was full of young kids, and they were hooting and cheering. It was just a wonderful experience. There wasn't that kind of reverential silence that you normally have in the British theatre. And they were, every time the young woman cussed the young boy or something, they were kind of in there with those kids on stage. So yeah, sorry, I'm slightly going off the point here, but in terms of audiences, you don't want to be pigeonholed. You don't want to be part of a ghetto. You want, you feel that if you're writing, if they're universal themes, and especially if as a political writer I want to bring about a change in attitudes, then for me, and I think that's one of the reasons that I've always picked popular genres. I don't believe I'm any good, partly, and B, I also don't feel drawn to being experimental in terms of art forms, because I think that can be quite alienating to people. And I feel it's much more important to present the content. I want the content to be subversive, not the form, right? Now, you could have an argument about whether you can have subversive content in a traditional form, but I feel that I want to attract audiences by mediums that they are used to on television. So, like, writing. I mean, one of the novels I started writing, which I never finished, was in the form of a soap, because I felt there's an enduring appeal to the soap as a format, and then within that, if you're going to alienate your audiences at all, or make them think or challenge them, you do it because the content is subversive. So that hence the ballad, in a sense. I mean, okay, today maybe the ballad isn't a popular form, but there's something about verse, and that has a certain appeal. But of course, having said that, in theatre, it's, verse is supposed to be kind of death. Nobody's going to come and see, a verse play.
Unless it's rap, of course.
Unless it's rap, yeah. Yeah. But then that's not considered conventional theatre. You see, it'll be spoken poetry. It's a different kind of an evening. Yeah.
But does theatre have to be conventional?
No, it doesn't. But it's also about making a living, isn't it? I mean, the point is, we all, you are unfortunately dictated to by the demands of the market to some extent. Now, either you don't give in to that and you do another profession, so you teach or you do something related, and then you write in your spare time, and you write for no money, and you get, maybe performed in some small play. Do you know what I mean? There's a whole industry, there's a whole economics to it all. And there are all kinds of compromises that one makes along the way. Some you won't give in to, and some you do,
It's interesting you're talking about the different styles, and some of them very alienating and subversive. Some where fewer people go to, but you actually write for the media. You write for radio and television and film. Now that's a whole different audience, isn't it? That's not your 2%.
No, exactly. I mean, again, to give you an example, the film Provoked, which was based on the book that I was talking about, had a sort of Bollywood superstar in it, Aishwarya Rai. She took the main role. Now, she's, I'm sorry to say, not a very good actor, but she has immense drawing power, right? And what happened was that because she was in it, the film got shown in villages in India up and down the country. And although at the end of the day, because I co-wrote it and I didn't have as much control over the script as I would have liked, so the end result was not something I was immensely proud of. But in political terms, it was a very interesting debate that started off, because if you are just beginning to get people to understand or accept that violence towards women is bad, then here you've got a woman who no longer will accept that her husband will beat her and responds by killing him. That takes that debate almost to a whole other, it's a leap forward politically. So therefore, are you saying that, it is acceptable to kill? In what circumstance? So the debate begins, why didn't she leave him? But that debate, for it to take place, up and down the country in a place like India, is amazing. So I suppose aesthetically, in the end, not that I made a choice, but I wasn't in no position to enforce it. But aesthetically, there were compromises that were made with that project. But politically, it achieved, stuff that, say, Southall Black Sisters, which is an underfunded little group in Britain, would not have been able to achieve. We often talk about the fact that we want to be able to go out into the community and talk about violence against women, but we are, very few in number. So the film achieved that. So that's what I mean. It's a popular form. Film is a much more popular form. Well, it's not as popular as television, of course, but it's definitely more popular than the theatre.
Yeah, which is great. And we're going to have a little diversion in a while. You're going to have a little chat with your daughter, who's also a writer. But before we do that, is there anything that you'd like us, the audience, to know that you think is really important in terms of what we're talking about?
Do you mean South Asian students of theatre? Or,
Not necessarily. We talked about audiences, and you like to get as wide an audience as possible.
Yeah.
So this is not really specifically for
Okay.
any South Asian theatre
Right.
audience. Just anybody who's interested in diversity, in the world
Yeah.
about us.
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing is, I feel we should not be pigeonholed as artists. That there shouldn't be an expectation that we tell certain kinds of stories, and that only those sorts of stories give us validity or authenticity. That we should, be able to tell a story of, which, and I suppose that's the way in which racism operates within the theatre and within the arts world, is that, people of minority backgrounds, writers of minority backgrounds, are expected only to work with the stories that they are most familiar with, as opposed to white writers have, the world at their feet, as it were. So